It's a privilege to be here. They don't often let me out to other dioceses, from my home diocese, so it's only good to be here. I want to thank, publicly thank Art Bennett for inviting me and Bishop Burbridge for saying yes, okay, and for everybody's generosity and hospitality in being here. It's a pleasure to be with you, especially when we have to talk about what we have to talk about today. You're all to be commended for being here on a Saturday, a beautiful Saturday, to talk about this stuff, but it's important. It's important that the church be involved with this. It's important that the church not only be involved, but take a leadership role with combating the opioid crisis. Let me tell you how this got started with us, and a little bit of history. The Diocese of Greensburg, the Diocese of Arlington is what, like 21 counties, I think? We're 4 counties, okay? We're 4 little counties in southwestern Pennsylvania, east of Pittsburgh, east and a little south of Pittsburgh. Mostly rural. In fact, compared to Alexandria, all rural. The opioid epidemic hit us, particularly in western Pennsylvania, really pretty bad. Our demographics continue to die off. The economic recovery has not really hit us the way that it has hit many other places around the country. We're still kind of a hurting place there in a variety of ways. In 2016, there were, in our 4 counties, there were 319 deaths due to opioid overdose. 319 deaths. 174 of those deaths were in Westmoreland County, the county where Greensburg is. 174 deaths. Last year, in Westmoreland County, 2017, there were 193 deaths. This year, so far, we are as of the beginning of September, we are at about 62 or 3 confirmed opioid overdose deaths. And there's about a dozen, I forget exactly, I talked to the coroner earlier this week, there are about a dozen or so investigations pending. That's still 60-something deaths. But it's hopeful in the sense that it seems to be dramatically cut down. How's that happening? How's that happening? Well, I think there are a variety of things that are happening there, a variety of events, not the part of which involves us, part of which involves the church. And that's what I want to talk about today. A little bit of the background here, a little bit of history. One day, a couple of years ago, I was coming out of a meeting in a conference room in our pastoral center across the hall from the bishop's office. It was the end of the day. I was tired. Everybody was tired. It wasn't about this. And I came out of the conference room, and my tie was loose, my collar button was open, and simultaneously the bishop comes out of his office across the hall, and his collar's open and his button's loose, and he says, "Man, I gotta talk to you." And whenever the bishop points at you and says, "I gotta talk to you," that is never a good thing. That is just never a good thing. And he said to me, apparently much as Bishop Burbridge has said here, we have to do something about this. The church has to help to deal with this somehow or other. This too many people are dying. The bishop has told me, and he's told other people publicly, that he talked to too many priests who have buried people who died from opioid overdoses. He talked to too many family members who lost loved ones to opioid overdoses. He talked to priests who literally were getting worn out, with funerals and with calls to family members and such, because of opioid overdose. He said to me, "We have to do something about this. Get back to me on that," he said. Well, I'm a counselor in Pennsylvania. I am not a certified addictions counselor. I've worked with people in addiction, but I'm not a certified addictions counselor. I never worked in a recovery facility of any kind. So I didn't know really what we're going to do here, But I've been around long enough that I know a lot of people who do know what to do. So I started making some phone calls to people. And I got a group of people together. This is literally how this began. I got a small group of people, about a half a dozen people, that I asked, can we get together to talk about this? And everybody not only said yes, they jumped at the chance to collaborate, to work with the church. They were honored to be able to work with the church. So we got together. What are we going to do? Well, after a few discussions, it was decided that it would be a good idea if this started at the top. So we made a suggestion to our bishop that he write a pastoral letter on the opioid crisis. We presented that idea to him, maybe you could write a pastoral letter that would cover this, this, and that. There wasn't even any discussion about it. Yes, let's do this. And of course, again, whenever the bishop says, yes, let's do this, that means do it. So there was a group of 3 or 4 of us who drafted a pastoral letter. And by the time it was in its 5th or 6th draft or something like that, it made its way to the bishop's office, to the bishop's hand. And he worked on it along with us. And eventually that letter was published as a pastoral letter, from death and despair to life and hope. It was published on the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul in June of last year, June of 2017. Hit the airwaves in a big way. It was published in, of course, our paper, our diocesan paper, and on the website. But it got news coverage, local news coverage in Greensburg and Pittsburgh, and it really set the standard. In that letter, he, our bishop, laid out what the problem was. This is an epidemic. Too many people are dying. He quoted some statistics, which I, of course, won't go into here. But his concern was that this is a culture of life issue for us because people are dying. This is a pro-life issue because people are dying, and people are dying needlessly. Addiction is a disease that is treatable, that is preventable, and that people recover from. Why do we have 319 people in the diocese who are dead? He asked for a response from the church that included collaboration with anybody who will work with us, and he directed us to work with anybody who we can work with to address this problem. He did not mandate a particular treatment, or that Catholic Charities do something particular, or that we have recovery houses in every parish, or anything like that. He made no mandates like that. The mandate that he made was that parishes have to be responsible to what's going on in their communities. Pay attention to what's happening in communities. Pay attention to the people. Gather the people together, much like we did. Gather the people together in your communities who can help, who can help to provide you some direction about what to do here. That's what has begun to happen. Once he published this letter, a direct outcome of this letter was that this small group of people, which formed itself into the Bishop's Advisory Board, suggested that what is the role of the church? We can't do everything. We can't be everywhere. We don't have. Art this morning, I sat there with my mouth open. Said that all the people who were checking us in here today, 17 people or so, something like that, were all clinicians from Catholic Charities here, which is wonderful. We have 17 people in our whole Catholic Charities staff. I have 3 therapists who work in the counseling department, counseling services. We are very, very small. We can't do all of this stuff. But what can we do? We made the decision. I thought a good one, and the bishop agreed. The church can do 2 things. We do 2 things. I'd like to think we do more things well, but we do at least 2 things well. We pray and we teach. Okay? We pray and we teach. And we saw our role, the church's role, as the role of offering prayer, offering spiritual comfort and guidance to people who are addicted, to their families, to communities, to parishes. And we saw our role as spreading education, spreading information, disseminating information about addiction and about recovery to anybody who will listen. Part of that is to get the information out there, but part of that is also to break down what Michael referred to earlier today about the stigma of dealing with this stuff. Okay, because I'm sure you all know, there's tremendous stigma dealing with any kind of addiction, really. So, with that in mind, what we proposed and what we subsequently carried out, summer of last year, summer of 2017, we carried out 7 prayer and education sessions around our little diocese. These were evenings of prayer and education about opioids and opioid abuse and recovery. They were meetings, they were gatherings in our parishes, but they were open to the communities. They were publicized not only on our website and in the Catholic paper and such, Catholic social media platforms and such, it was also publicized in the secular press as well. The response was unbelievable. We didn't know remember the 4 of us, the bishop and the vicar general and the director of Catholic Charities and I, we drove to all of these sessions together, and we're going down to the first session. We didn't know if there were going to be 5 people there. And I remember saying in the car, well, if there's 5 people, we talk to 5 people. We had almost 150, okay? And not all Catholic, by the way. And that was a small parish. That was just the beginning. That was just the beginning. We anticipate that over the diocese, small diocese, we spoke to probably in the neighborhood of about 1,500 people or so in these 7 sessions. So that was really good. Let me give you the outline of what these sessions consisted of. They were advertised as prayer and education sessions, but they were also advertised as sessions for the bishop to listen. The bishop went to every one of these sessions, and he listened. He did not participate in the sense of having any. No, he led the prayer service, but he did not participate in having anything to do with the education piece or anything like that. He listened. The sessions went like this. We would gather, of course, have an opening prayer, and then we went into an education piece for about 20 minutes or so, 20, 25 minutes. The education section, I did that. I called it Drug Abuse 101. We had to make a decision about what we were going to present, initially. And we decided we had to keep it very, very basic because we didn't know who the audience was. So we did a presentation very similar to what Michael did this morning. These are what opioids are. This is what they do. Here's how they work. Here's what overdose looks like. Here's what recovery entails. It was just very, very basic. And we had people at the questions afterwards. We had people who would ask questions like, well, what's the difference between drug abuse and opioid abuse? People who didn't understand. So I'm really glad that we did that real basic sort of level like that. But the other feature, of course, that we didn't know how this was going to work. We had medical personnel there. We had physicians who were addiction medicine specialists there. We had pharmacists. We had other counselors and treatment professionals. We had people who were in recovery themselves. We had family members who had lost a family member to addiction. We had politicians there. My goodness, we had politicians there. It was, we didn't know who was going to show up. And literally hundreds of people showed up at these sessions. They were tremendously well received. So we did these education pieces. Now, after the education session, what we did was we removed ourselves. Most of these sessions were held in the social hall in the church. We removed ourselves to the church for a prayer session. The prayer session was a liturgy of the word session. The bishop was the celebrant. Song, reading, appropriate readings, brief and very heartfelt, sincere homily by the bishop. Bishop gave the remarks. And intercessory prayers, and I neglected to mention this earlier, but the intercessory prayers were for people who are suffering from addiction of any kind, not just opiates, but of any kind, family members, people who were in recovery. We also prayed for, in the intercessory prayers, we prayed for first responders, medical people, counselors, social workers, the the people who come upon the person who is overdosed, on the back steps in the alley, that kind of thing. The people who perhaps get there a little too late sometimes, the people who were administering Narcan. We allowed some time between the education session and we're moving to church for the prayer service for some questions and for some testimony. Okay? Does anybody want to tell their story? Does anybody have anything that they want to share with us? My goodness, the stories we got. Bishop wanted to hear. He heard a lot. And we could not have set this up any better if we'd have scripted it. So many people came out with so many stories. People who were in recovery themselves, family members who lost, families who lost members to addiction, medical people telling stories. It's boggling. It's mind-boggling to me to think of some of these stories. I'll give you an example, just briefly. We had a guy stand up, young guy, identified himself, and said that this was the first time, our session here was the first time he spoke publicly about his addiction and about his recovery. He was 8 months in recovery. Clean-cut young man, Catholic, Catholic school graduate, the whole thing. Bad choices, led himself into the got started on drugs, and once the opioids took over, then he's not a choice anymore, it's that whole thing. He was rushed to the emergency room one night, details aren't important, rushed to the emergency room one night, declared dead, revived with Narcan. Mother was called, was declared dead again before she got to the emergency room, was revived again with Narcan. Ended up, if I remember correctly, saying that over the course of that night, he said that he was alive because of 12 doses of Narcan, okay, over the course of that emergency room stint. He said, he's telling us this story, and I'm thinking to myself, I've heard people say that, well, Narcan, after 3 times, then that's enough, let him die, kind of thing. You tell that young man that he should be dead. You look that young man in the face and tell him that he should be dead. And if you can do that, then the next person who stood up was this woman who was sitting beside him. And she gets up and identifies herself as his mother. And she described her pain and her anguish of getting the phone call about her son being in the emergency room. They, close to, at the time that she got the call, close to death. She's rushing to the emergency room in the middle of the night, not knowing if she's going to find her son alive or dead. And after 12 doses of Narcan, he was revived for the second time. And she's just tearfully describing this. If you can tell him that he should be dead because he had more than 3 doses of Narcan, then try to tell her that, Look that woman, if you can do that, you're tougher than I am, let me tell you. I could not do that. I just seeing the anguish on their faces. And we had so many stories like that. So many stories like that. After the prayer service, we went back downstairs, and don't laugh at this, but we went back down to the prayer service. We went back downstairs after the prayer service for coffee and cookies. The reason I'm saying don't laugh at that is, first of all, Catholics always have to have food around, right? It's always a good thing. But secondly, we lost almost nobody in the transition from the education sessions to the church, and from the church back down to coffee and cookies. Everybody stayed, and everybody had a chance to talk. Everybody had a chance to talk to the bishop. Everybody had a chance to talk to any of us. And really significantly, people had a chance to talk to one another. There were people on this side of the room who were suffering who were suffering the loss of someone, and there was somebody over on this side of the room who talked about what helped them to get through. So afterward, these people were talking to one another. And there were treatment providers or pharmacists or other people in the room that people were talking with. And we could not have set this up on our own, no matter how much we would have tried. It just was tremendous. It was just a tremendous, and we did this all over the diocese. We did 7 of these sessions all over the diocese. After one of the sessions, we had close to 200 people in one session. And at coffee and cookies afterward, the district attorney came up to me. And he said, how do you do this? And I said, how do you do what? How do you get all these people here? So, well, we put it out, we put the word out. It was advertised in the press, so why? Why are you asking? He said, if I try to do a drug forum of some kind or other, I get 20 people to show up. I think I'm doing something. You've got 200 people here. That's the outreach of the church, ladies and gentlemen. That's what the church can do. And that's hopeful, That's hopeful. We've got a captive audience. That's why so many people have been happy to work with us. One of the completely unexpected outcomes of this thing, these efforts, were all the people who stepped forward to work with us. Government agencies, as I mentioned before, pharmacists. Do you believe we collaborated with local government agencies putting them? There was one agency, one government-sponsored organization in our county, unknown to us, put all of our resources up, identified as our resources, on their website, and hosted it free. They just did this, The church and the government collaborating on something. It's like, wow. And we didn't even know about it. We didn't even know about it, until they literally came in one day and said, "Hey, take a look at this. What do you think?" And there it was. So that's been really, really helpful. Following this, in the spring of this year, 2018, the bishops' board decided that what we needed to do was we need to train parish clergy and parish staff. What we wanted, so we had a couple of Thursday afternoon sessions, 4 actually, Thursday afternoon sessions, and all around the diocese. And we brought in all of our clergy, all of our parish staff, all of our volunteers that the pastors deemed, who needed to hear this, and whoever it was. Again, several hundred people, throughout the course of March this past year. And it was a sort of a more detailed drug abuse 101, but it was also about what to do if you encounter someone, either someone who is addicted or a family member. You see someone after Mass or during youth ministry group of some kind or other, or somebody who staggers up to the rectory door at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever it happens to be. What do you say? Who do you talk to? Where do you go? What do you do with them? How do you talk to them? We didn't do this training actually. We had one of our collaborators, one of the agencies that we had, 2 of the agencies actually that we work with, actually put together and conducted this training with us, and it was tremendously well received. It was very, very good. These sessions also included local vendors. Any resources that we could find who wanted to be there, we set up tables for them so that they could meet. And one of the goals of the session was to have the parish staff meet the people who were there, exchange their business cards, so that if somebody showed up at 2 o'clock in the morning, they have a name and a number to call. They know where to go, who to talk to, what to do. All right. We had what are in Pennsylvania called the single county authorities, the county-wide agencies that oversees drug and alcohol services county by county in Pennsylvania. We had representatives from the single county authorities in each of the counties at these parish sessions. And they would say, we have all these education, we can come into parish groups, we can come into schools, we can come into your religious education or youth ministry groups. And we can do this, that, educating them about drugs and about overdose and it was great, And I remember one of the sessions, one of the pastors, after this was all done, asked the single county authority person, "Okay, but our budget's really tight. What's this going to cost?" She said, "This doesn't cost anything. Your tax dollars have already paid for this." You could hear jaws hitting the floor. Okay, and they've taken advantage of that. They've done that. They've taken advantage of that. There have been some parishes have developed some really good collaborative efforts with local providers that are coming into the schools, and et cetera, and coming into some, not enough in my opinion, but some parish organizations to help out and to provide more education. This has been really, really good. So what are the kinds of things the parishes have been doing? Well, they've been doing some of these kinds of things, like I said, working collaboratively with single county authorities and other treatment providers, recovery groups, etc. sponsoring events in their parishes. One of our parishes just last week for example, was hosted. September is National Recovery Month. One of our parishes just last week hosted a recovery fair in the parish with open to the community, with treatment providers and other folks making known what they have available, but people there telling their stories of hope. Talking about how how recovery from opioid addiction is possible. It takes a lot of work, of course, but it's possible. It can work. Some of our parishes have gotten Nar-Anon groups together. They host Nar-Anon groups. Some of our parishes, I'm thinking of a three-parish collaborative, actually, in particular, who have gotten together what's called substance addiction ministry. It's a 6 or 8 week recovery group. It's actually a transplant in our diocese from the Diocese of Pittsburgh, and I don't know where it came from originally from Pittsburgh, but we reached out to the individual and asked if he would come and train our initial group of people, and he did, and I was there as part of that. We have a few parishes who have taken off with this. It is thriving. It is going tremendously well. There are a couple of other parishes now who have jumped into the fray and are sending representatives to the substance addiction ministry group in these parishes to learn how to make it work, so that they can go back into their parishes and work it. So those are some of the kinds of activities that are going on. Again, our Bishop Malesic, he did not mandate that anybody do anything particular, except pay attention to what's going on in your community and be responsive to what the needs in your community are. Now, recently, we have a meeting of the Bishop's Board next week, Tuesday, I think. We have, unfortunately for us, and for all of us in a variety of ways, we in Pennsylvania ran into we got slapped upside the head with the grand jury report that you all have heard about. And that has kind of set us back in terms of our engagement with this work. But we are moving ahead, nonetheless, because our bishop's idea is that we move ahead. We don't go back to the church that was 50 years ago. We move ahead to the church that's tomorrow. And we are convening the group again next week. And the plan there is to begin to address how we can support and encourage more local effort on the part of the parishes and schools. There's a lot that's begun to go on, and in a relatively short period of time, really, about 1.5 years, really. In fact, not even 1.5 years. So that's been we think we're doing all right, but there's always, of course, more that needs to be done. The road to collaboration is. It was just completely unexpected that we had this many people willing and able and pretty much begging to participate in us with this, which is really good. That's all good news. We've cut down. All of us have apparently cut down opioid overdose deaths dramatically in our area, and I think the church's leadership is necessary, and I think the church's leadership is welcome. The church's collaboration with everybody around us is necessary, but we're part of it. We have to be part of it. That's the good news. The bad news, and I sort of hesitate to say this because there is some bad news. I talked with our local coroner earlier this week. Ken, how we looking? Says, well, overdose opioid deaths are down, approximately the numbers that I mentioned to you earlier. That's the good news. The bad news is that cocaine and meth deaths are up. Don't exactly know why. We can speculate why, but don't exactly know why. It's not enough to say that there's a trend yet demographically, but we are noticing an uptick in cocaine and methamphetamine deaths. The problem, I'm beginning to think, and people who are far more knowledgeable about this than I am, will tell you that we make a mistake if we focus solely on the substance. It's not the substance, it's the process. And we kind of known that all along. I mean, what is the single most overdosed drug on the planet? Alcohol. It has been for like millennia, and it still is. You know, the problem is addiction. So one of the other topics on the agenda for this week's meeting is how do we continue to refocus our efforts on addiction in general, without letting go of the opioid piece to this. Boy, there's a lot more I could talk about, but in the interest of time, we need to break here at 2 o'clock. I'm going to stop there. I will be available after the prayer service and everything if anybody wants to talk individually. But I want to, while we're all here for a few minutes, I want to just open the floor for any questions.
One of my concerns is, have you seen pushback from the dealers, people who deal in drugs, and have you seen any pushback in any other of the sectors that you talked about?
I'm not exactly sure, has there been any pushback from dealers? I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to really kind of talk with the coroners about that in some detail, and we have actually 2 coroners on our board, so I'm going to add that to the list to talk about. But I will tell you this: I think this is just me. I think the pushback is in the form of finding another market, and I think people who are, and this isn't me saying this. This is one of my colleagues. We have seen an increase in our area. We have seen an increase. We see fewer heroin deaths and many, many more deaths from fentanyl. People are thinking that, I don't know what it costs around here, but a stamp bag of heroin in Greensburg, where I'm from, is $6. Okay. It comes down to how well do you trust your dealer, I guess. People are beginning to realize that the stuff that they're buying on the street can kill them. So the dealers are kind of losing there a little bit. I mean, they're losing out. So I think one of the things they're doing is they're switching to cocaine and meth. If there's pushback, it's in the form of, I think, my impression, it's in the form of just switching the product. Again, it's too early to make any call about a trend, but that's what's looking like what's happening right now. Another question?
I'm Vicki B., one of the Parish Liaison Network participants from St. Louis Parish here in Alexandria. The model that you described, as your bishop talked to our bishop, have you taken it to the National Conference of Catholic Bishops as the model?
I don't go to the National Conference of Catholic Bishops meetings. Yeah, I'm waiting for him to invite me, but he hasn't yet. It hasn't been taken as a model, but we have gotten national publicity about this thing. It's not anything we've sought. I mean, there have been articles in America Magazine and on NCR and other about this, and I know that our bishop has said that after his letter first came out, the first meeting the following November, he said I came back as kind of like a minor celebrity from the bishops' meeting. Everybody wanted to talk about this. Okay, Bishop Burbridge was in the first of these sessions, and he was writing furiously. Sitting right here. So he knows about it, and whether they talk or not at the bishops' meeting, I assume they will.
Well, I guess I was just meaning generally, is this something that could be considered a model for the rest of the diocese and the nation?
It's a model for, it could be, yeah, sure, certainly. But I probably should have said this at the beginning. What I'm talking about is what we've done, our experience. If it's useful for you, at least in some of your area, I described just very briefly the composition of our diocese. Run with it, I'll give you my business card. We can talk. That'd be fine. And I mean that. If it's not appropriate, or if it doesn't seem like it would fit for whatever reason in any area of diocese, then obviously leave it go. I'm not presenting this like it's a, and I know you don't take it this way, but I'm not presenting it like this is what you should do. This is what we've done. Can you learn from any of our experiences? Any of it makes sense? And if you can, good. That's helpful.
Thank you. I was just thinking about, this is good, but there was one movie, one TV show that I was, my children were watching. It's called Breaking Bad.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like glamorizing the drug, the drug industry. And I was saying to myself, how can they show it? How come nobody's going to these networks and telling them stop? It's like, so is that part of the church's, strategy? One of the strategies to at least let them not glamorize the industry.
It's not part of our strategy to go after the media. Although I completely agree with you, it's glamorized. Part of what we're trying to do is to educate about the disease of addiction and about abuse and about what happens to people who do overdose. And of course, as you know, it's not pretty. It's not pretty physically for the people who die. It's not helpful for the people who are left behind. What's not shown on TV, except in perhaps brief little spurts sometimes, is the suffering that lasts for a long time. People's lives are forever changed. People's lives are, as you know, people's lives are forever changed. We're not going to go, I think going after the media, I don't know.
Maybe do if they do this, then you do this, you make a movie out of what they are doing, the consequences of what they're doing.
We're trying to, I know on our end, we're trying to just put out there what we see, what's going on in our communities, without glamorizing it, but also but being honest. Here's how many people are dead. One of the newspaper reporters who was at one of our sessions wrote a very, very good article, tremendously good article, I thought. But he described the education presentation as full of grim or ghoulish statistics. And at first I thought, well, but then I thought, well, there it is, yeah. And I talked with the reporter. It was a complimentary story. It was fun. I just kind of read it wrong whenever I first read it. But yeah, they are grim, ghoulish statistics, especially whenever you figure they don't need to happen. Okay. One more question, and then we're going to have to break here to go to church.
I just wanted to echo what was mentioned over here about being a model diocese. You mentioned you had 4 counties, I believe. How many parishes in those counties?
About 78, 79.
So very close. We're around 70. So in a large number of years ago, or I say several years back, you were 300 and something deaths. So I think that the statistics that you had mentioned, the drastic reduction, is indicative, speaks to the effectiveness of what was being done. I agree that it needs to be supported at the parish level, but the start of that, of course, is at the top with the bishop. So as much as I wanted to write feverishly myself, I know this is being recorded, so but I was glad to hear that the bishop was doing it. So I hope that some of what you've been speaking about, I thought this was wonderful.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know that there were other. Yeah, sure.
My name is Maria. I'm the administrative assistant for Catholic Charities, and we put together the sign-up sheets outside. And you mentioned that 2 things you do well is pray. We do well is pray and teach. And it struck me that people really, especially here, people want to tell their stories. So would you recommend when we, as people sign up, as we try to respond in our diocese, would you recommend that it's better to have, just get people together to tell the stories, or is it better to try and start the networks and bridge the gap between finding the resources and introducing them to parish staff and people who are suffering?
That's the, I don't know that it has to be an either or. It can be a both and. Maybe in some areas the networking idea is a better idea first, and in other areas perhaps the stories. I'm a therapist. I love telling stories, and I believe in the power. I believe in the power of stories. So I would. That's part of the reason why whenever we did these things, we did the teaching part, but we left time for the stories. And as I said, boy, we got them. So I would, first or second, I don't know, but I would absolutely make time for the people. There's a hunger for that, and there's a hunger particularly to do that in the church, supported by the church. Okay. It's just very powerful. Okay, you're welcome. I'll be around after the prayer service if anybody wants to talk any further. I know there were some other questions, but I'll be around later. Thank you very much.